Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be watching a video called Why American Buses Are Just Worse. I have never thought of this before, like why would American buses be worse than others? I haven't really given a lot of thought to buses in general. I think just like one bus is sort of like the same as the others. Like once you've seen one, you've seen them all. But apparently there is some sort of like baseline. I think like what makes a bus bad? Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if we're talking about like the actual structure of the actual vehicle or just the actual, I don't know, like the driving or like the routes of like, I don't know, they're on time, they're not on time. But I don't know. So let's check it out and comment, like, subscribe, and start.
Buses have a really bad rap in North America. Less so in Canada, but it's still a thing, and I don't like it. Now, of course, there are a lot of reasons for this, but one of the biggest reasons, and one that I think gets discussed far too little, is that the buses here in Canada and the United States are just worse than our international counterparts. But why? And how? And could we do something to fix this? If you like videos about how soft the seats on buses are, you should subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos like my upcoming series on places that should have rapid transit but don't. When a friend from Europe came to visit Toronto recently, we took a ride, naturally, on one of Toronto's newest and nicest buses. It was a hybrid delivered just a few years ago, and to be honest, they were amazed. Why is the ride so rough? The bus is rattling so much, is it going to fall apart? Why do the wayfinding screens look like they were designed in the 1970s?
Not in a bad way.
Oh my goodness, the seats are so hard. I must say the comment startled me a little, but it did remind me of when I first moved to Toronto, where the buses felt notably less nice and rougher than those I was used to in Vancouver. But Vancouver isn't bus heaven. If you want to truly see what buses can do, a trip to Europe, Latin America, or Asia makes a ton of sense. Oh, and I should probably also say I'm likely going to say North America in this video at some point, but in this case, sorry Mexico, you don't count, your buses are too good. Now, a big part of why transit buses are probably so much better in much of the rest of the world is that there are just so many more brands competing. For example, MAN, VDL, Volvo, Hess, Scania, and indeed even Mercedes. Yes, all of these years you could have been riding on a Mercedes-Benz Citaro bus. Now you know. From these many brands, you'll see a ton of cool features. But what I actually argue you see the most of is a diversity of different buses. Currently in North America, bus manufacturers seem to be trying to pare down their offering. In fact, Vancouver recently ordered Novabus Suburban models, which are just city buses with one less door and bad seats, meant to be used on routes where coach buses are the correct answer. By comparison, in the rest of the world, you've got everything under the sun. You have the usual 2-axle city buses and articulated buses, but you also have longer 14 and 15 meter buses with 3 axles. More capacity than a regular city bus, but less than an articulated. There are also 4-axle articulated bus variants.
I've never seen that one in my life.
And you can also see bi-articulated buses in Europe and Latin America, with not just
I've never seen those.
2 bendy bits.
Ever.
In fact, some models even look like trams, which is all the more reason the autonomous Bus Rapid Transit Gadget Bond from China is not a big deal.
Wow,
meanwhile, despite the US and Canada having more road space than almost any other countries in the world, there is not a single double bendy boy to be found here.
Really?
It's also common in the rest of the world to see buses with more doors. I talk a lot about this with trains, but it still holds true with buses. More doors mean people can get on and off of a vehicle more quickly, which makes your route faster and more pleasant. But in the US and Canada, 99.9% of regular city buses have 2 doors and 99.9% of articulated buses have 3. But surprising as it might be, that's not the case everywhere. In the rest of the world, 12-meter city buses with a 3rd door behind the rear wheel are actually really common. And the same is true of articulated buses with 4 doors, again with one behind the rear wheel. As it turns out, there are even some articulated bus variants with 2 middle doors, meaning they have 5 doors in total, which is just crazy.
That's way too many doors.
Planners and enthusiasts in North America gush over the idea of 100% low-floor trams or light rail vehicles. We still order 70% low-floor buses, even though 100% low-floor buses are common in other parts of the world. If you're wondering how that works, this picture should help.
Yeah.
Electric buses are, of course, also much more common. Well, you can count the number of major trolleybus systems in North America on one hand.
Yeah, that's
they're
not really a
all
thing
over
there.
the place in Europe. And even in cities that don't currently have trolleys, new systems are being set up, and in the meantime, battery electric buses are being ordered. In fact, Amsterdam Schiphol Airport has over 200 electric buses just for the airport, more than
Just for-
most
yeah, for
major
the
transit
airport?
systems in North America, just for the airport. In fact,
That's
in most of the
crazy.
world, buses have been getting electrified for a lot longer than here in North America, and by all kinds of different means. And of course, many of these cool features get combined to create incredible high-capacity buses that could serve all kinds of purposes that we couldn't even imagine in North America. Bi-articulated electric trolleybus? Yes! Oh, Switzerland. And for what it's
Oh, in
worth, the experience
Switzerland.
on board buses in Europe and frankly most of the world is also just better. Seats with more padding, better layouts, and higher quality materials are all common. The wayfinding tends to be better, and the ride quality also tends to be a lot better. The
This one was perfect. Where was
London
this?
bus, which I took on my trip to London last year, on the last day of my trip to London, actually put me to sleep almost immediately. It was glorious. So why is it
The
like
idea is for you
this?
to see the city, not
everyone's
to fall
favorite thing.
asleep.
Policies and regulation. In the US, there are Buy America and similar rules, which means that federal dollars are not going to any European buses. And unfortunately, in this
it's
case,
money.
similar rules actually also do exist in Canada. At the same time, super dated safety regulations also pretty obviously have an impact. I actually think it's worth addressing the idea that North American regulations are somehow safer, because this frequently comes up in transit enthusiast communities, but it's just not the case. Usually, the definition of safety used in North America is highly specific and highly pedantic. And while we might
Okay.
score very well for our definition of safety, when you actually look at safety from a perspective the average
isn't?
person would agree makes sense, it's kind of a wash as far as I can tell.
Okay,
At the same
makes
time, for a
sense,
long
actually.
time, there appeared to be little questioning as to whether regulations in North America that did things like force trains to be twice as heavy as in Europe and the rest of the world were having
Okay.
a positive or negative impact on the transit experience. A
Yeah.
nice parallel to kind of get what I'm talking about are automobile regulations. Part of the reason that trucks and SUVs are so much more common in North America is that our safer regulations don't take into account the safety of people outside of the car. So as long as everything inside your enormous
Well, that's
truck
insane.
mostly stays in one piece, no matter what you slam into, you're good. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
most of the world moves far more people on public transportation than us, especially on things like buses. And so I think we can accept that maybe the rest of the world knows how to keep people safe. Now, at the same time, the archaic rules and regulations of the North American bus market mean that we have only really two major players, Novabus and New Flyer. These two companies do admittedly produce better buses than most of the other remaining manufacturers in North America, but that isn't saying a ton. And both of these
Okay.
companies are actually based in Canada, where, shocker, there's a lot less negative stereotyping around bus use. Now,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, there are smaller players in the North American bus market, like Proterra and BYD, who produce electric buses. But their buses seem to be of sort of questionable quality, at least based on results in Toronto. There
my
is
God,
also
really?
Gillig, who only sells buses into the US market, but they also still sell buses that look like this. Now, to
But
be
what's wrong
completely
with
fair,
that?
most manufacturers do have models which look better. And Novabus in particular does produce some pretty decent looking models, probably influenced by their parent company, Volvo. But even
Oh,
our
it's
best
a
buses here in North
subsidiary.
America would probably look pretty meh on average in Europe. It just seems to be the case that in the rest of the world there are more buses to pick from. And so Europe and Asia and Latin America and Australia and other places around the world see more competition and better buses. Australia in particular is a pretty great example. They tend to buy their buses from overseas companies, and their buses are a lot nicer than the average
Oh my
one
God,
seen
that's
in
so
North
big.
America. In fact, Brisbane is actually even getting beautiful new electric bi-articulated buses for its Metro project. To give some credit to North American transit agencies, some of them have actually tried to import European buses. Viva in York Region, for example, has ordered Van Hool buses straight from Belgium, and they're great. They're nicer than the buses that aren't from Belgium. And as it turns out,
Oh.
AC Transit in the Bay Area ordered a ton of Van Hool buses throughout the 2000s. But in
Okay.
recent years, they've fallen in line, and now they purchase standard North American buses. Now you might wonder about prices. I certainly did, and I sort of expected that buses that were nicer would cost at least a little bit more.
Yeah, it's
but
more
it doesn't
expensive.
even seem conclusive that that's the case. I'm guessing that because in the rest of the world there are just so many companies competing for bus orders, prices are still similar, if not lower, because again, more competition drives down prices and probably gives you better buses too. An interesting situation happened with Alexander Dennis, for example. Famous for their double-decker buses in the UK, years ago they started selling the Enviro 500 model in North America, and they've been wildly successful. So they actually ended up starting up a local production facility to produce buses and sell them directly into the North American market. And now they've actually been bought out by Canadian manufacturer New Flyer, which I can only hope will lead to New Flyer getting some influences from Alexander Dennis. Now what's so frustrating about all of this is that the actual drivetrains used on most North American buses are the exact same as the ones that would be used in other parts of the world, typically built by third-party companies. So the buses actually operate much as they would in other parts of the world, simply with a less nice, rattly bus shell around them. The idea that a bus will be adequate as long as it has the required number of seats, fuel economy, and keeps running for the required number of years is exactly why we have so many problems with public transit in North America. To say that user experience has taken the back seat would be an understatement. This approach gives transit agencies less flexibility, costs them more, and creates a worse experience for passengers as well as probably operators. So maybe the answer to better buses in North America is to just do what the rest of the world does. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so he had like a lot of interesting points. Although I do disagree a little bit when he was like, "Oh, most of the world." I don't know where he's been, but it's not the case for a lot of places. At least where I've been, the buses. I think like for him, I think maybe it's his experience, and he's like, "Oh, all over the world, like it's the norm." It's not it. It's not it at all. And I think even the buses that he considers bad he was like comparing mostly with Canada, but even the buses that he was saying, oh, they're bad buses. It's like there have been in places where those buses would be like, oh my god, like what an incredible bus. So I do have to say I disagree a little bit with that, because he was like, oh, it's the norm all over the world. It's like, no, absolutely not. I can tell you, I can assure you actually that it's not like that. That's not the case. Like the nicer buses, I think, are probably a norm. Like if compared to probably Europe, I think Europe does have. Obviously, I'm expecting them to have obviously nicer buses, especially like compared to Canada, United States, and maybe apparently not Australia and Latin America and Asia and other places in the world. Yes, I think Europe probably is, but maybe Asia actually, because I think Asia also I'm expecting them to have like pretty good buses. Not throughout all Asia, probably some countries specifically in Asia, but a lot of Asian countries probably do have like great buses. So I think probably the ones like leading the race are probably Europe and some places in Asia. But it's like, and maybe outliers in other places in the world. But it's funny that he was like, oh, these are terrible buses. And it's like, compared to what? Because yes, compared to those places that I've just said, maybe they're gonna be bad. But again, it's not the reality for most people in the world. Like those buses would be incredible. And he's like, no, these buses suck. So it's funny. And also like he was mentioning like a friend of his was in a friend from the UK. And he like got into the Canadian, I think it was Canada, I think it was Toronto or Vancouver. No, I think it was Toronto. And he was like, oh my god, this bus is awful. Like, look at the sounds that this thing is making. Is it gonna break down at any second? And like the seats are uncomfortable. And he's like, oh my god, you wouldn't last a day in some buses that I've seen or that I've actually driven in those buses. Like you wouldn't last a day there because it's crazy. It's like the sounds and stuff. It's like, well, yeah. But it's funny that he's like, oh my god, like he's so like it's a bad thing. And obviously yes, because if you're used to this incredible bus system, of course you're gonna be like, wow, like what was that sound, or wow, this is super uncomfortable. But yes, there are buses in places, I just want to say that there are buses in places that are 10 times or like a million times worse than what we've seen and what they consider to be bad. So again, I think that's the reality for a lot of countries in the world. So I think they've been in places where the bus system is actually public transport, actually the public transport system is nicer, so of course they're gonna be like, their baseline to compare is gonna be very different. But just I would love them for them to just like check out other countries where they have like terrible bus systems, and it would be very funny. They would be fighting for their lives, and afterwards it would probably be like, you know what, Canada is maybe not so bad, because again, I'm seeing that apparently obviously they're enthusiasts, so obviously they're I'm just kind of like low-key joking, but obviously because they're enthusiasts and they know a lot of things, and they're very knowledgeable about buses and obviously like brands and types of buses. Obviously I don't really know anything about this, and I'm just going by I don't know, it looks nice, I think, like the actual like vehicle, and it looks comfortable, like, well, comfortable. It's, you have to actually sit in the seat to actually be like, oh, this is comfortable. But also like rating them in stuff like, yes, obviously the doors, like you need more doors. If you have more doors, people get out faster. And obviously they also have the ramps, which I think a lot of buses don't even, I think there are places in the United States that don't really have it. And for disabled people, obviously it sucks because you need the door with the ramp for your like people in wheelchairs and stuff to actually like get out of them. So, and some places don't even have that. So, obviously like that sucks, although, that's a whole thing about like disabilities and stuff. But, whatever. The whole, like, again, they're enthusiasts. They know a lot about buses. So obviously they're the experts. But it's like, well, I've never seen like the ones with the three sort of like parts. It looks like that's almost a train. Like the thing is like, even when it was like 4, it's like, come on, like that's huge. Like how can that thing like be like in the city? Like it's very big. I never seen one of the 4 ones, the 4 separated things like in real life. I think I've only seen maybe 3. I think I've got probably up to 3. Those are like the biggest ones that I've seen. I had no idea that they had even ones with 4. Although I think that was maybe China, just China, if I am remembering correctly. But it is, he makes really good points, and I didn't know that there were like so many manufacturers of buses in the world. It's not that I never thought of it, but I thought it were maybe like, I don't know, a few brands, but I didn't know that even famous like Mercedes or Volvo, like other car manufacturers actually like also build buses. But it makes sense. Obviously they're under maybe other company names, but the parent company it's the one that's making like the vehicles that But it makes sense because obviously they want to expand, and it's an actual vehicle, so why wouldn't they? But it's like, and obviously they have their own thing because they're not mixing the actual vehicle like a normal car with the bus, because it's very different. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I feel like I learned a lot. But he does make a point, and I think everything comes down to money. He's like, well, it's because they don't really want to spend the money, although apparently he did the math, and it's like, it's not that expensive if you compare like the buses that are maybe bad and the ones that are better. Like, why don't they get better buses? And I think maybe like, yeah, he mentioned all those points, but I think it all comes down to money. Like people are just like, the ones the government and the city, like the city doesn't really want to spend like that much money. And probably something about, I don't know, it's being comfortable, and they just like buy local instead of like going overseas and buying them. But they absolutely should. And obviously what he said, I think is super true, is that the people that are actually like driving, well, not driving, but the ones that are like riding the buses and they're actually using the bus, it's it's users and people, and by people I mean the government and the ones in the higher ups. They don't really pay much attention to the actual users, which obviously sucks, because at the end of the day, again, the users are the ones gonna be using the buses, so they should be like, hey, we deserve something comfortable and we deserve something nice. But obviously the ones in the higher up places are not gonna be like, oh yeah, we're our biggest like responsibility is with you. Like there are very few places that really do take into account the user like experience, which obviously it sucks, but that's how big companies and a lot of governments tend to work. So it sucks, but I think there is room for improvement, and maybe I think it's one of those things that if enough people really do like enough people as in citizens, they really do, they band together and maybe they work, right to their government. And even just, in the city, you're not going to write the president, but just be more probably involved. I think that it could be a thing that it could change, actually. I think it's one of those things that I feel that if enough citizens really do band together, I think they can change things, especially like in a micro level when it comes to like cities and towns. I think it would be worth giving it a shot. But yeah, this was incredibly interesting. I feel like I learned a lot from buses, and hopefully you do also learn a lot from buses. And that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!